if there's one game that I have my eye on, would be Ohio State, Michigan, and it's one because it's really because this year it feels like it's the ugliest this rivalry has gotten, and you almost feel like if Ohio State loses this game, do you fire the head coach right there on the sidelines, right? Because like you can't even beat Michigan when the coach who cheats isn't there, right? Like it would almost feel like you're failing an open book test and I've given you 3 hours to complete it, So that's the drama that I like with this Michigan situation. It feels very 90s WWE attitude era where it's like Michigan's now the role of Stone Cold and pick whoever Stone Cold may like, and it almost feels like Ohio State's Mr. McMahon, right? Like, like you're still in this, but for some reason you can't get some things done. And that's what's interesting because knowing a little bit about the Michigan program and how they've built, it's really built from the ground up in the state of Michigan with a lot of kids through youth football. Like there are kids who I know who are playing youth football that end up at Michigan and they tend to stay a little longer, right? Where at Ohio State, you know who the hot flavor of the month is, and they're going to be gone next month, right? We know that Marvin Harrison Jr. is gone after this season. So if Ohio State loses, and keep in mind, it's going to be an anticlimactic game. Whoever wins that game plays Iowa, right? Like, what a greater example to get rid of conference, divisions in the conference. But I think that Ohio State Michigan game has that feeling of almost like a daytime drama or pro wrestling crescendo leading into WrestleMania.
Wolverines -3.5 favorite. That hook, I've heard a lot of people talk about it, that the hook is kind of that last thing where you go, 3 seems about right, 3.5, maybe a bridge too far. Where are you on this one?
First and foremost, I am all over Ohio State. I love the 3.5. I love that hook. I actually think Ohio State is going to win this game.
Okay.
To me, I've watched both teams play my team, Penn State. I believe Ohio State had the better performance, had the more dominant performance. Michigan wore down Penn State's defense. Michigan's defense had 3-and-outs throughout that second half. J.J. McCarthy didn't even throw in the second half. So, of course, the defense for Penn State got worn down, and finally Michigan started running the ball at big clicks. Now, early in that game, Michigan was giving up huge chunks of yardage to the Penn State running game. Won't even talk about the passing game. But in Penn State, Ohio State, the man, and I'm going to call him the man until proven otherwise, because he is the best player in college football, bar none. Marvin Harrison Jr. absolutely took that game over. I've not seen a wide receiver take over a game like that in a very, very, very long time. To me, Penn State's secondary is the best secondary in the Big Ten. They have 2 guys that are probably going to go early second, early third at the latest. Oh, Michigan doesn't have that. So my thought process is this is Marvin Harrison's game where he's going to go, give me the Heisman. Do I think he's going to win the Heisman? No. Should he probably? Maybe. But I think this is Marvin Harrison's prove it game. He leads Ohio State to a victory over Michigan in the Big House.
All right, real quick, we'll get to the Iron Bowl. This one tomorrow. Number 8 Alabama 10-1 at Auburn 6-5, and Auburn coming off just a god-awful loss to New Mexico State last week. Alabama, big number here, 13.5 in the Iron Bowl. Again, it's on the road, 650 on the money line. The total set at 48. Talked to P.J. Glasser yesterday. He was an Alabama grad. He said if this was at Alabama, he'd have no problem laying 13.5, 14 on up. He's like, but he just doesn't like going to Auburn because weird things happen in this game at Auburn. I'm a little more confident than he is. I think Alabama rolls in this, even though they're looking ahead to Georgia next week for the SEC title game. I just don't trust Auburn on any level.
Yeah, I think Alabama will use this as those old Saturday morning wrestling matches where it would be like Macho Man Savage versus the guy who lives next door to you, right? I think they're going to use Alabama is going to use this Auburn game to really iron sharpen iron with their players to be ready for the game with Georgia next week. So I'm not scared. You look, in the past, if you had a decent Auburn team, when you're coming off a loss to New Mexico State, and you're like, aren't they on probation? But you're thinking, no, that's the basketball team, I think, that was put on probation. When you start thinking like that, you're like, damn, they really lost to them. So Auburn is trying to save face, and sometimes when you try to save face, it can get uglier. So I like Alabama to probably cover the spread by time halftime hits. I think it's just one of those things that they've got to show that they're serious business and make sure that Georgia notices that they're not asleep at the wheel. If you told me that this spread was 18.5, I would take it as well.
We were all, and I was on this as well, making fun of Sean Payton. Who wasn't going to be there next year? Would it be Payton or Russell Wilson that got run out of town? All of a sudden, they're 5-5, and they're in the mix. They got a good chance against this Cleveland team who's beat up to get to 6-5, and suddenly back in the AFC playoff race.
Yeah, this Denver team is starting to look like the team that I thought they could have been when they first got Russell Wilson. Just didn't realize that the Nathaniel Hackett situation was such a disaster. But we learned that in week 1 of last year, and it seemed like kind of the started to fall downhill all into your yard. Now it seems like the cleanup has started to happen. They figured a way to say, you know what, we can beat you in a 17-14 game. That's why this total is so low. I like Denver to cover the 1.5. 2 reasons: altitude and a rookie quarterback. So if you've got Dorian, sometimes hyphenated names. I don't want to put the names on the wrong side of the hyphen and offend the family. DTR. I think the altitude is going to be something that affects him, just because if this is the first time you're going through this. Now, granted, when he was in college, he did get to play in Colorado at Boulder, but this is a different speed. These are different guys. So I think that's going to factor in. I mean, he had a game that was manageable last week, and he was able to keep the show on the road, but it was against the Pittsburgh team that just cannot do anything offensively. This is a Denver team that still does have weapons and can run the ball effectively up the middle to combat Myles Garrett's rush to the quarterback. So they have the things to combat Myles Garrett and where he is on the field. I just don't know if the Browns have enough offense from its quarterback to get it past 14 points.